Well, our guest tonight is the Czech President Vaclav Klaus. As an economist and former finance minister of his country, he's a prominent critic of the European Union and its impact on the current debt problems faced by nations like Greece. President Klaus is also a climate sceptic who describes the term climate change as practically a nonsense, accusing some world leaders of making crucial decisions about mankind's future based on arrogance and fallacies. He's in Australia for a series of talks about the issue of climate change, sponsored by the Institute of Public Affairs. I asked him first for his response to the massacre and terror attack in Norway. Mr. President, the man who committed these atrocities in Norway, many people are suggesting he is a lone madman, but do you see that there is a worrying movement in Europe towards these sorts of radical views that he held?
Well, I wouldn't generalize that much, you know. On the one hand, he's definitely not the alone person. On the other, what happened there is out of European proportions. You know, we are used that something like that happens somewhere in some other continents, but in Europe this is out of proportion. So I'm really surprised in a very quiet Norway, and it's a crazy individual activity. On the other hand, you know, the multiculturalism and things like that, of course, has their other side, and this is not an accidental thing.
So what are the issues about multiculturalism that are emerging in Europe? Do you see this as a new front line for political division in Europe?
Well, I wouldn't say front line for political division. We have our other disputes and other fights which are much deeper. On the other hand, the immigration into Europe is a problem. I would say not that much in my country, but more in Western Europe. You know, this is a totally artificial and unnecessary immigration, which is not a genuine individual immigration. It's an artificial collectivistic immigration based on the totally wrong social policy in Europe, the soziale Marktwirtschaft, the social market economy, which is based on welfare and on giving benefits to people without working, and that simply such a system brings people inside Europe from other continents out of proportions, and this creates problems.
The alternative for Europe to shut the doors?
Well, the problem with immigration into Europe is not closing the doors or opening the doors. The alternative is to have a different economic and social policy.
Okay, well, if we talk more generally than this individual, his views were anti-liberal, anti-communist, what he calls cultural Marxism, and anti-Muslim. Is there a significant rise that concerns you of such far-right views in Europe?
Well, it exists, so I don't want to say that it's not a potential danger, but I must say I see other dangers in Europe as well, and I wouldn't start with that one, really not.
What are the dangers you see?
Well, the dangers is Europe as such. The real danger is the artificially accelerated unification of Europe, which is against the interests of people in individual European countries, and it creates big problems. That's one issue which I consider very, very complicated for all of us.
Well, let's look at the most urgent problem in Europe at the moment, the debt problem in Greece. Do you think it has been solved now?
Definitely not. When you send money somewhere, you don't solve a problem, you just postpone the solution, and then the second money sent to Greece is just another postponement, nothing else. And you know that Greece is just the most visible example. There are other problematic countries, Ireland, Portugal, potentially Spain and Italy, and there are no money which could be sent to all those countries from where to take those money. So I think that the problem is deeper, and the debt crisis is just what we see at the surface of all of that. And again, Greece is not alone in this respect.
As an economist, what do you see then? If it hasn't been solved, what do you project is going to happen?
Well, it's difficult to make a project. On the one hand is what I would recommend, on the other, what I expect would happen probably. Those are two different issues. Well, I'm afraid that the European Monetary Union, which means the common currency for now 17 countries, will continue, but the price for that will be enormous.
Other economists have suggested quite catastrophic outcomes if the Greek debt specifically, and then potentially Italy, can't be solved. They've talked about the breakdown of the common currency, of the euro, potential breakup of the EU. What do you think at its worst could happen?
No, definitely. Breakup of the EU is not the imaginable solution. Breakup of the Eurozone also not. What could happen, can happen, is that one country or another will go out of the euro system. So the fact that Greece or some other country would return to its old currency, in case of Germany, drachma, this is technically, administratively, organizationally possible and relatively easy. It's not a catastrophe to push one country or another out of the Eurozone system. It can be relatively easily done.
What about the debt crisis in the United States? What do you make of what's taking place in Washington and what the global repercussions could be there?
Yeah, that's another problem. We, for a long time, all of us underestimated that problem. All of us had a feeling that the United States will somehow solve the issue, but the developments in the last weeks and months show that the issue is very deep in the United States of America. And as a former Minister of Finance and Prime Minister who wanted to introduce as a constitutional law to have a balanced budget, so I can't imagine and I can't explain and I can't justify what happened in the United States of America in the last couple of years. So problem for all of us.
Can I move to the subject that you're speaking on in Australia? You've talked about the climate debate as not being a scientific debate, that it's an ideological debate. What do you mean?
Well, definitely the debate about the so-called global warming or climate change has its technical, scientific dimension. There is someone measuring the temperature, someone discussing the causes for temperature fluctuations. So this is science. On the other hand, there is a debate which has very, very small connection with science about the global warming just now in the world. This is not connected with science. Some people who are more ideologists than scientists are misusing some discussions inside climatology for trying to influence the world. That's a totally different issue.
Influence the world in what way? Because you've talked about environmentalists and others wanting to change society. What is the ideology you're saying they have? What do they want to do to society?
Well, this is an anti-free market, anti-democratic development. Simply the group of elitists, usually politically on the left, try to redefine our society, so redefine the values, redefine what we can do and what we cannot do, and they want to dictate us what to do, how to behave, how to travel, what to eat, what to do in society. And I experienced similar attempts in 40 years of communism in my country, so I hear similar slogans, I hear similar arguments, and I'm afraid of that.
Some people might suggest that that's raising a conspiracy. It's a conspiratorial way of thinking.
I wouldn't say that it's conspiracy in the sense that there is a central office somewhere giving commands to some other offices. That's definitely not the case. It's an ideology, and ideology is based on ideas, and when the ideas are wrong, it can have implications.
Well, the ideology is presumably also based on science. Let's talk about the science. What do you think is happening to the climate?
No, climate has been changing permanently in years, centuries, millennia, millions of years. So the term climate change is practically a nonsense, and it's not a statement. It has absolutely no substance and no meaning. The debate started about warming, about some sort of not random, not cyclical, not local, not regional, but global warming as a trend, as a tendency caused by human beings, by their use of fossil fuels. So that's the discussion. When the temperature stopped rising, so the advocates of the doctrine started to speak about climate change instead of global warming, because they have troubles to show that the temperature has been growing.
You don't accept that over a fairly short period in time that the temperature has been rising, the global temperature?
The temperature has been basically rising in the last, let's say, 2 centuries, maybe almost 3 centuries, since the end of the Little Ice Age, the medieval Little Ice Age, which lasted from the 13th to the 17th century. In that period, the temperature went down.
A vast body of science would suggest that it is man-made. You described Al Gore as arrogant, but is it arrogance that you hold your view above this vast body of climate scientists?
Well, I don't believe in the terminology of vast body of scientists. I have in my office hundreds of books. I would say I get a serious scientific study a day. Arguing, refuting the global warming.
You reject there's a consensus.
Rejecting the consensus. Every day I get a study. Every week I get a book, I would say. So there is no consensus in science, and the fact whether we can vote in science that 51% of scientists believes in the global warming, man-made global and dangerous man-made global warming, and 49 against it. It's a nonsense.
But the adherence of those who believe man-made global warming does have a scientific consensus. They'd suggest it's 90, 95%. How do you argue against those figures?
That's definitely not true. Where did you get those figures? Those are just the figures given by those people. But there is one petition of scientists, thousands, tens of thousands of scientists, one petition after another disagreeing with that idea. But the algorists don't accept the argumentation from the other side.
What would it take to change your mind? What sort of evidence would you have to see? Can your mind be changed?
Well, definitely we can listen to science, and we have to listen to science, but to base crucial decisions about mankind on such a debatable piece of science as we see in this respect, well, it's for me arrogance, unimaginable arrogance. Again, it's for me comparable to some sort of arrogance I experienced during decades of communism in my country. You know, I'm very sensitive to that, maybe oversensitive, and that's it.
You say it's a crucial decision. The stakes are very high. If you're wrong, it's disastrous, isn't it, not to act if you're wrong?
No, I can't accept that. With all decisions, with all your personal decisions, decisions of your family, decisions of your city, decisions of your country, you have to take costs and benefits. You have to look at what are the, in economic terminology, the opportunity costs, whether it's worthwhile to do one thing or another. You don't live in a one-way world. You personally live. You have to make choices, and therefore we have to make a choice, and to accept that there is no choice. There is a choice in all other human activities, but there is no choice in discussing the so-called global warming.
Some of your critics in the climate debate have suggested you've been too close, or your associates, some in your office, have been too close to interests in the energy industry, to fossil fuel interests.
There are many accusations of me, but I have never heard that one, because everyone knows that it's a total nonsense. I am the person of ideas. I am not a person of interests, and that would be the cheapest criticism, but a total nonsense, I must say.
So, putting on your political hat rather than your economist hat for the moment, advice to the Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who has nailed her colours to the mast, seeking a carbon tax originally before carbon trading. What do you think the future of a politician at the moment who pursues carbon trading as the long-term future of the country? What's the future for a politician?
I consider the idea of fighting the climate a nonsense. In this respect, for me, to discuss whether to fight a nonsense by means of carbon tax, or to find a nonsense by means of the emissions trading scheme, or how you call it in Australia, cap and trade, it's called in the United States, emissions trading scheme in Europe. So to fight the non-existent problem by method A, method B is wrong in both cases, so I have no recommendations for Australia in this respect.
Do you think it could be politically successful?
Some politicians, I think that why politicians accepted this global warming doctrine is because they don't have real ideas and really positive ideologies, and they discovered suddenly that the global warming story is maybe a good political card to play. You know, they probably think that by looking into the next century, next millennium, they look like caring, sophisticated, very human politicians, and they probably suppose that it's a good political card to play. So therefore they jumped on that train, and they go to, I'm sorry to say, to nowhere.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And the full interview of that with Czech President Vaclav Klaus can be now found on the ABC website.